listen completely for free. Does the city still have one of the incentives in the beginning? The state has some, and the feds have some, and that works. But there's another one for the pollution control district, but they ran out of money. So
like they're still deep in thought there.
Yep.
Let's open the meeting and call the roll.
Commissioner Bottarini,
Present.
Commissioner Lickey, Commissioner Sivian,
Present.
Commissioner Tracy,
Here.
Commissioner Ettinger,
I want to be present.
Commissioner Engler,
Right here.
and Commissioner Lux.
Here.
Let the record reflect we have quorum with Commissioner Lickey absent.
Okay, we've had a request regarding the agenda from the planning director to switch item B and handle item A before B before A, and I just wanted to see if there was any objections to that.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Okay, roll call.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
So we'll go ahead and deal with the land use amendment first.
The minutes.
Minutes and
Do the
Oh,
minutes.
conflict of interest.
Public comment.
Yeah,
Okay.
So then we'll go ahead and deal with the minutes for, do I have a motion to approve the minutes from January 23rd?
Move approval.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any acceptance of communications correspondence at all?
I would like to report that we received a letter from Ms. Pamela Rudd regarding 720 Johnson Street.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of conflict of interest? Any? Disclosures of ex parte communications?
Chair Tracy, today I went to the site for Johnson Street and met with Mrs. Rudd for a little while and talked about the project.
Any other? Okay. So now is the time for public comments. This time is set aside to receive comments from the public regarding matters of general interest, not on the agenda, but related to Planning Commission business. Pursuant to the Brown Act, however, the Planning Commission cannot consider any issues or take any action on any request during this comment period. So do we have any comments of general interest tonight? If not, we'll move ahead with our agenda and deal with item B, Land Use Amendment, LUA 21703.
Members of the Planning Commission, I'd like to introduce Joel Galbraith, Senior Planner, who will be taking this item forward tonight. Thank you.
Chair Tracy and Commission members, the item before you is a zoning code text amendment to amend sections of the land use code to allow more opportunities for employee housing for agricultural workers. The recommendation before you is to review the draft revisions, receive public comments, and by motion recommend approval of resolution 2018-02 to the City Council amending Healdsburg Municipal Code sections 2008, 100, 150, 155 regarding land use tables for employee housing and employee housing agricultural, and section 2028-310 regarding definitions. To give you some background, in 2010, the City Council amended the land use code to allow employee housing, and this is generally for agricultural workers, for 6 or fewer employees to be considered as a single family dwelling, and this is consistent with state law. And so currently in the city, for 6 or fewer employees, it's allowed as a single family residence in the R1 districts and in the Grove mixed use district. In 2014, the current general plan housing element was adopted, which includes policies to expand employee housing opportunities to the MU district and the 2 office districts of ORM and MP. In last year, in 2017, Segacio Winery approached the city about using an existing single-family residence that they own adjacent to their winery at 782 Grove, also known as 14782 Grove Street. They made a request to be able to use that existing single-family house for up to 11 agricultural workers. Under the current code, they could do that by right for 6 or fewer, because under the code, 6 or fewer is allowed by right and that implements state law. But anything over 6 is not allowed anywhere in Healdsburg by use permit or as a right for agricultural workers, or also what's known as employee housing. So the proposal to implement our current general plan and to allow for larger farm worker housing, the proposal before you is to make a recommendation to the council to amend the land use code to allow for 6 or fewer employees as a permitted use in the mixed use district and the 2 office districts, and to amend the code for the Grove mixed use district to allow larger farm worker housing, and that would be that would range from 7 to 12 agricultural workers, and that would be subject to a conditional use permit. And this graphic shows the zoning districts that we're talking about this evening, and this is the Grove Street mixed use in green, and this is the Gacio wineries here. But so basically, proposal will allow the larger farm worker housing by conditional use permit in this district, which is currently allowed by right for 6 or fewer. And in the mixed use districts, the proposal is to allow for the smaller 6 or fewer by right. And in the office districts, it also would be allowed 6 or fewer by right. So in conclusion, the recommended action is to review the revisions, receive public comment, and by motion, recommend adopt a resolution making recommendations to the City Council regarding these proposed changes. Are there any questions of staff at this point?
Any questions?
Yeah, I couldn't figure out from the staff report exactly what employee housing is. Can you tell me what it is?
Yeah, it is the reason it's somewhat confusing. Under employee housing, that term is coming from state law. So our code just talks about employee housing, refers you to a state statute, which most cities do it that way. And employee housing under state law basically is referring to agricultural workers. So these are workers who a lot of times are migrant workers, and they're working out in the fields, out in the vineyards, but they need housing. So the employee housing is basically referring to people working out in the fields.
Yeah, I understand that, but I want to know what are there any conditions on what the facilities are, what you have to provide, whether it's just bedrooms, whether it's complete living units. I couldn't figure that out.
Okay, so the state law does have they do have requirements. So basically, it can be a dormitory style. In some cases, for 6 or fewer, it's basically treated as a single family house. So somebody could have a single family house in Healdsburg, and they could use that to house up to 6 agricultural workers in a single family house with a kitchen, a bathroom, and bedrooms. So that would be permitted currently in most residential districts in Healdsburg, and that's coming from state law. So there are not a lot of basically the state law is trying to make it easy to house agricultural workers with very few requirements.
Tell me why the staff report says that this housing is not subject to the growth management ordinance.
Because basically it's the same. It's basically a facility. They're not separate housing units. It's basically it's a facility.
So it's just you don't count it as a single family residence. You count it as some sort of it's more like a hotel, if you will, something like that.
It's more like yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Julie?
I I didn't see in here where there's any provisions for inspections of the unit to make sure that it's appropriate for 7 or more, or even for 6. So I was just curious, are there provisions as far as inspections go to be sure that we're not overcrowding or creating a problem?
So for 7 or more, they would in the Grove mixed use, they would apply for a conditional use permit. And the state of California does regulate farm worker housing, and they do inspections.
The state doesn't,
The
not
state
the
does.
city.
The state has specific standards, and they do regulate it, so they do inspections.
Thank you.
So this is farm worker housing?
Right. What we're talking about generally is housing for agricultural workers. Is your people working in the fields? Correct. They're working on a separate site from where they were being housed.
Okay. So a 2-bedroom, single-family home theoretically could have 12 people living in it. That's what the proposal is, basically, from Sagacio's.
My understanding, what they're proposing is they're not proposing 12. My understanding, they're proposing 10.
And if I could clarify, because that proposal will be subject to a CUP, the Planning Commission will get to see that proposal when it comes.
As I understand it, this is not only farm worker employees, though, right? I mean, there's 2 sections. One part of this speaks to employee housing, and the other part of it speaks to agriculture.
Right. And the reason for that, and this is somewhat, I mentioned this is confusing because it's coming from state law, which is somewhat confusing. But there is a section in state law called employee housing. But if you go and read it, it really is talking about agricultural workers. And so most people, when they look at our code or any city's code, they see employee housing. They don't know what that is. They don't know that that's farm worker housing. So since the city's adding a section for the larger ones, which we don't have to do, it's optional. The goal was to try to make it clearer for the larger ones so people know we're talking about agricultural workers.
But the 6 or fewer don't necessarily have to be.
They don't necessarily have to be, but the way the state law is written, that's basically what it's for, but it doesn't specifically say that it has to be.
It happens that I read part of it, but it's very boring.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that. It looked to me like they talk about agricultural, but they also just talk about housing for employees. So
They do, right.
it seemed to me that if you had a restaurant, you had 6 employees, and you had a place that they could live, you could allow that.
Right.
And that's what you're saying. That's not a conditional use. 6 or less.
For 6 or less, it's basically referring back to state law. If we want to do 7 or more in the Grove mixed use, the city's saying that's for agricultural workers.
So, given the way you've written this, 7 to 12 on page 9 of 20 is only for people raising or harvesting any agricultural commodities. So if let's say a business, we don't have to use Sagacio, it's just an easy name, wants to employ their workers that are inside the winery in there. They can't. They would be prohibited.
So if they apply,
Okay.
right? So if they apply for a conditional use permit for 7 to 12 agricultural workers, the way this is proposed, however many they apply for those, this would be specifically for people working out in the fields. There is provisions in our code now in industrial, which the wineries and industrial, that you can do workforce housing. So they can I think they have another house on their industrial site, they want to do workforce housing for people working at the winery, they can do that. But the way this is set up for this agricultural housing, it's specific for agricultural workers.
And who's going to regulate that? The state would say yes or no to the people living there? Is that?
Basically they need to get permits from the state for agricultural worker housing. A lot of
I think
times,
where we're going with this is, I think most of us probably think it's a grand idea, and maybe not necessarily it's a bad idea, but what would preclude a winery from either having the cellar workers or a culinary person stay there? I mean, what's the harm? What's the foul? So I understand state law just for farm workers, but is someone going to say, well, where'd you work today? Oh, you're out in the field? Fine. Oh, you worked in a restaurant? You're out of here. How's it work?
yeah, I don't have a good answer to how that would be enforced.
Interesting.
So, because this is a conditional use, if we move ahead and recommend this to the council, and this is passed by council as new code, they would come before us, any applicant that wants to house employees from 7 to 12, agricultural employees, we would have significant discretion as a conditional use, I understand, to actual provide conditions for how this would operate. I think legally as a conditional use permit, we have significant discretion, do we not? To add things that would perhaps provide a little bit more, assurance that they're doing what we would want them to do.
Correct.
And,
Right.
and not creating some kind of enforcement hardship to staff too. You don't want them to be the ag worker police,
I think if we look at, I'm not sure how the county does the whole thing, but they have farm worker housing. I know of one that has cellar workers that stay in that housing, and they're certainly the county has created that, and I think those guys deserve to stay there, but they're not out in the field. They're cellar workers. So I think it's pretty tough to pick and choose which employee needs the help.
And I think that's one reason staff is proposing this just in just one district, and also limiting it up to 12. Like Santa Rosa, they allow larger ones by use permit with no upper limit.
Yeah.
So I think the goal of this is because this is something new, is to limit it at this point to this one district and to limit it to 12.
Any more comments before we?
I have a couple questions for Joel. Could we take just a couple-minute break?
Sure. Absolutely. Take a break. Any more questions or answers?
Yeah, we have no more.
Okay.
No more answers.
All right. So at this point, let's open it up for public comment. If you want to comment on this item, please come forward and state your name and give us your comments. Seeing none, we'll close that part of it, and let's go around and hear your comments on this, and then we'll open a motion on this issue. So would you like to go first, Rich?
I'm willing. Theoretically, I'm in favor of where we're going with this proposal. However, I'm going to have a difficult time voting tonight without some more specificity on the type of conditions. Generally, over the years, we've looked at conditional use permits as permitted uses. Once you take out that dash and you put a C in there, it means it's the type of use that can go. You just condition it. And over the years, I've never seen a conditional use permit turned down or too onerous of conditions put on it. I have questions about overcrowding. On the use and how it fits in with the state law. I still have a lot of questions of, give me more information about the state law so I can feel more comfortable that once we start to allow it, that there are the checks for overcrowding, there's checks for sanitation, there's checks for various portions of the ordinance before we just approve something which in many times, once you approve it, is never, very seldom followed up unless there's a complaint. So I'd like to be a little bit firmer ground on what we're approving and the standards in which we come back on a conditional use permit. So I'm in favor of it, but I would have a hard time voting for it tonight.
Yeah, I've got the same concerns that Commissioner Bottarini has. I will vote for it, but I won't vote for any project unless I have a far better understanding of all the health and safety issues that are associated with it. I want to know who regulates it and who specifies that there are fire escapes and toilets and enough ventilation and enough heat and all the things that you'd have, that somehow this doesn't fall through the cracks. The notion that you can put 10 or 11 people in a single family home and still meet all the regulations seems to me something I'm questioning. I'm going to vote for it because I think we ought to have that discussion. I think we can do it on a case-by-case basis. But if an actual application comes before us on this, I'm going to have to be satisfied on all those issues.
That's where I was trying to go with this, was to figure out who was going to police this situation. I too am in favor of it, but as Phil has mentioned, I think we're going to have to look at each situation case by case by case and condition it and keep a close eye on it.
I guess I don't have that many concerns. I think that as they come in on conditional use permits, certainly the sagacios aren't going to let it become a problem if for no other reason their marketing won't stand it. I think that if we were going to be concerned about any of it, it would be the permitted use, 6 or less in a permitted use, that we have no say over at all. So it seems to me that if we look around and are be real honest with ourselves, we already have this. This just gives us a handle on it. So I'm very much in favor of it.
I'm generally supportive as well. I'd like to know a little bit more about the actual physical improvements that are associated with this type of housing. I tend to agree with Commissioner Lux and Engler that go ahead and move forward on this, but when we do have a proposal, we want to know all the specifics of state law and really know the details. That way we have a better handle on exactly what we're approving.
And I am only supported in principle. I don't think the proposal and changes in our land use law here provides enough specificity for us to make reasonable judgments about a conditional use permit that may come before us. And I would have difficulty figuring out what sort of findings I would make to make that approval. So I'm supportive of it in general, but I can't vote for it tonight myself because I don't think there's enough detail in here for me to support it, and I think it needs more language in the code. So do we have a motion on the resolution?
I'd move approval.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor? Want to call a roll?
Okay. Commissioner Bottarini?
No.
Commissioner Sivian?
Yes.
Chair Tracy?
No.
Commissioner Ettinger?
Yes.
Commissioner Engler?
Yes.
And Commissioner Lux?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. So let's move to our next item. Design review for a new single-family residence in the Johnson Street Historic District. And if we could have the staff report, please.
Assistant Planner Jeff Fisher will deliver the staff report.
Good evening, Chair Tracy and fellow commissioners. Tonight's item 4A, which has been changed to 4B, but it's still 4A, I'm assuming, is a design review application for a single-family residence in the Johnson Street Historic District. Tonight's the scope of review for the project includes a project consistency with the general plan, the land use code standards, and the historic overlay compliance. Just a quick overview. The project site is located. It's a 8,845 square foot lot located on the east side of Johnson Street. It's basically mid-block between Sherman to the north and Lincoln Street to the south. The project includes the construction of a new two-story house, approximately 3,547 square foot residence, built in the Gothic farmhouse style. And this gives you an idea of the overall where it's located within the entire Johnson Street historic district. The district ranges obviously in the black lines here, all from Piper up to Powell Street. Regarding what's existing on the site currently, it's currently developed with a residence and several accessory structures, originally built somewhere around 1902. All the structures on the site will be removed prior to construction of the new home. An historical evaluation was done on the property by our esteemed docent, director of the museum, Holly Hood, to determine if there was any historical significance to the house or the property itself. The conclusion there was no historical significance to this house, and so the project would not require a historic demolition permit to remove the structures on the property. The site does contain one mature walnut tree, which is the biggest tree on the site. It's in pretty rough condition. That's going to be removed, and then the site also, and it's not a heritage tree. It's only 18 inches. And there's just some smaller ornamental trees on the site. There are no heritage trees on this site. And just to give you an idea of the surroundings here, to the north we have 726 Johnson Street, which is a single one-story house. This slide points to the site with the lawn growing in the front. This is looking north from the site, and as you can see, we have some existing small ornamental trees on the site. And this is from the rear, looking towards the north. This is the walnut tree that's in kind of rough condition. And this is from the rear looking to the east. These large trees are on the neighboring property to the east. And here's the proposed site plan for the project. As shown, the primary living area of the house is located. Can you all see my mouse here on the screens? Okay. Primary living area is located towards the front of the site, with a smaller wing along the northern property line here. Access to the site is via concrete strip driveway with lawn in between. One required parking space is within the garage, and the other is in the carport right here in this area. The site also contains ample outdoor outdoor area, which will be fully landscaped and will accommodate some decking and landscaping up in the front yard also. And as noted, all the structures on the site will be removed. The existing house, these little accessory structures in the rear and back here. And also just a few of the ornamental trees and the walnut tree will be removed. And this slide gives you an idea of where the new house will be located with regard to front yard setback compared to the other adjacent houses. As you can see here, we have the front porch, and they're just right, almost even with the neighboring houses. And that leads us to even a broader setback slide that we have here. When you're dealing with historic districts, front yard setback consistency is an important aspect. As shown in this slide, the setbacks on this block of Johnson Street range from approximately 9 feet all the way up to 37 feet. I just did the one side, just not to clutter the slide here. But it turns out on both sides of the street, the average setback turns out to be just around 20 feet, which is exactly what the proposed house is going to be set back at.
On both sides of the street, Jeff?
Yep.
'Cause the other side looks like it's not close to 20 feet, but it could be.
Well, I took an average. So, you got one at 9 feet and you have one at 37 feet,
Yeah.
but the majority of the houses are in the low 20s, low to mid
10s
20s.
and 16s, yeah.
Yeah. The existing house on the site is set back approximately 22 feet. Slight reduction in front yard setback of the proposed house will provide a more consistent setback rhythm along the street and is preferred over siting the house further to the rear. With regard to the elevations, traditional farmhouse architecture, for the most part, utilize classic board and batten siding, similar to that as being proposed, usually in a white or off-white color. That's the most common color for classic farmhouse design. The wood entry door and the wood carriage house garage door are also traditional elements found in farmhouse architecture. While almost traditional farmhouses utilize a wood shingle roof, many contemporary designs include either composite or standing seam metal roofs, as is being proposed with this project. The roof material is a muted gray, matching the window trim and foundation, thereby providing a cohesive color theme to the house. The addition of the brick treatment at the foundation provides a modern contrast to the vertical siding. While a brick foundation is not a traditional element in farmhouse design, I did go out and walk all the way up and down the entire Johnson Street, and there are quite a few houses which have this brick treatment on them. I think I counted probably 8 or 9 houses that have that brick treatment, some sort of brick on the foundation area or the porch. Therefore, so the use of brick is not really unusual in this context. The elevation plan also shows the relative massing of the house. The massing of the front facade of the house. This is the front elevation here. The massing is significantly reduced by the varied roof slopes and the building projections. As you can see, it's not just one big square. We have the sloped roof here, and this is actually a projection from here. And then the roof over the porch comes out towards us. So you get varying degrees of ways to lessen the massing there. Secondly, the location of the garage also reduces the massing just simply by virtue of its setback from the house. The design of the porch also reduces the massing with the use of columns and the addition of different building materials, primarily the brickwork. Large windows also add visual interest to the front facade. Along the northern elevation, the second story is confined to the front of the house. As seen on both the north and south elevations, you can see the general massing of the house is towards the front. the second wing being the second story. So it's really broken up the massing here. The primary living area along the side of the house is single story, which is this wing here, it's adorned with windows and varying roof slopes also. The two-story section of the southern elevation includes numerous windows, building projections, and is broken down into smaller sections, thereby reducing the perceived massing. The rear elevation is similar to the front of the house with varying roof slopes, large windows, thereby eliminating any sense of monotonous facades, so to speak. With regard to scale, and what I mean by scale is when you are comparing something to something else. So in architectural terms, scale refers to comparing the proposed house to the other houses on the street. And it's pretty evident that when I was walking along Johnson Street, there's many different size houses on the entire stretch of Johnson Street. None of the houses really clearly dominate the streetscape with regard to their size. So there's a lot of variation. There are little homes, and there are big homes, and there are medium homes. So I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at the exhibit. It's pretty small. There was something wrong with the not wrong, but the file size. I couldn't blow it up anymore. But those are included in your staff report, and it shows the scale of this particular block of Johnson Street and how the house fits in with the remaining houses or the existing houses on that block. While the proposed home would be probably one of the larger homes on the block in terms of square footage, the scale of the home will not be overbearing and does not dominate the streetscape as perceived from street level. The front of the house, with its A-frame design, sloping roofs, tend to soften the perceived mass compared to the design of, for instance, the large house 2 doors down, which really, the massing really wasn't, it's a beautiful home, don't get me wrong, but the massing is much more evident on that house there. There's not much articulation and no building projections, so to speak. And the recessed garage tends to reduce the massing also, as will the landscaping once it's matured. And speaking of landscaping, the applicant has provided a full preliminary landscape plan, which includes an olive tree in the front, a plum tree in the rear, and some smaller ornamental trees and fruit trees, along with shrubs, some turf areas, and some ground covers. And this slide is also included in your staff report. This just shows that the house is compliant with the land use standards with regard to setbacks, site coverage, and heights. And this is a really nice rendering provided by the architect. This is looking from Johnson Street, looking to the northeast, and looking to the house, from the south, or looking to from the southeast. We asked the architect to provide a slide or an exhibit showing sun angles. This exhibit shows the neighboring house to the north and the sun angles at their peak during the equinox. And basically, the lines, these lines show where the shadows would be on the north of the house to the north. So they're pretty low, and the only one that's really affected it would be during the winter time. And due to the fact that the back wing of the house is single story, for the most part, the entire backyard should be in sunlight. They won't really want to affect it. I can let the architect speak to that after I'm finished here. And we also asked the architect to provide a diagram with regard to privacy of the adjacent properties. This exhibit shows the project site here and the window locations and how they would be looking down onto the neighboring properties. The, the second story is set back. This side is 18 feet from the property line. The minimum requirement is only 10 feet. So they've gone beyond the minimum requirement by 8 feet. This side is approximately 15 feet. And like I said, this side is 1 story, so privacy issues, there won't be any issues with this wing here. And staff is recommending, in summary, the staff finds that the project is consistent with the general plan, land use code, and the design review manual. And it should be noted that the new citywide design guidelines, as you know, that you just approved a few weeks ago, they have not been adopted by the city council as of yet. So we can't use these as a basis for findings for this particular project. And as such, staff recommends approval of design review application 2017 and the resolution based on the suggested findings and subject to the conditions of approval identified in the resolution in your staff report.
Thank you, Jeff.
And the applicant, the architect, and the owner are here to answer any questions.
Okay, so do we have any questions now of Jeff, staff?
I've got some for the architect, but
Yeah, me too.
You know, just a comment. I think we go through this all the time, but I think you did a really good job. It's really easy to understand.
Thank you.
This particular project.
So would the applicant like to make some comments?
Sure, and I'm Jim McCalligan, project architect. I've come to know the neighborhood pretty well. I did the house across the street for the applicant's daughter, Tisha, who's here. And I do have quite an affinity for the character of the street. I appreciate the historical nature of it. So this was an attempt to be sympathetic to what's, the character of that street, but also do something that says something about the present. So while I'm up here, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Do you have a sample of the roof?
Yes.
And there's no problem with sun reflecting back off of this, or? I just haven't seen that many metal roofs in our area. Usually used to see it where snow is or something, Okay, you can take. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
yeah. What's the square footage of the second story, roughly?
I don't know right off the top of my head, but I'm going to say it's around 1,000. It's about a third of the total, maybe.
That was my guess too.
Yeah. It's on the plan. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
Thanks.
Yeah,
1224. Anybody? Any other questions? Rich?
Rear yard, is there some shade structures being proposed?
yes. There's a
And are they,
trellis.
the trellis system there, is that included as part of a structure?
No, it's mostly open. It's less than 50% solid.
I'll ask staff. Staff, I was reading your description of lot coverage, and that type of structure would be considered a portion of lot coverage? Because
Yes, usually any permanent sort of covered patio, so to speak, would be considered as lot coverage, yes, if it's permanent.
My understanding, it has to be habitable space to be, for lot coverage. A trellis structure does not count.
According to the definition of lot coverage in our land use code, covered patios are included in that.
That's not technically covered. I mean, it's It's only, I think it's less than 40% covered.
Yeah, I have two more. I happen to like the rendering.
Thank you.
It's very good. There are some light fixtures shown on some of the drawings that are not shown on the rendering.
Right.
Which way are you going to go?
The drawings are correct. We didn't get every little detail on the rendering. Yeah, there's some
Okay.
barn-shaped hood lights that are shown on 2D drawings. Those are accurate.
Okay.
And they're down lights, black.
The renderings colors seem on the tiles around the base seem to be more of a reddish color. These seem to be very dark charcoal, and then there seems to be a greenish tint to the roof elements. I like the rendering. But I like the color, the subtleness of the colors there, a little bit more than those colors. But these are your actual materials?
Those are the actual materials, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sometimes renderings don't always depict colors perfectly, and sometimes printers don't either, so it's hard to get them exactly right.
What's the relationship between the finished floor of the house and existing grade of the adjoining fence to the neighbor to the north?
I'm going to say it's about 24 inches. Could scale it off the plan, but it's close to that. I think we have 3 steps coming up off the street, 3 8-inch risers.
Yeah, it's typically 22, 24 in that range.
Yeah.
So if you're standing in the finished floor of that portion of the residence, you're going to be a couple of feet above the adjacent ground outside.
Mm-hmm.
So if there could be some visibility from those bedroom windows to the adjoining neighbor because of the grade situation.
Over the fence, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And Commissioner Botter, we already hit the issue with lighting. And you already talked about the pergola not being part of the approval tonight. It's just a graphic on the drawing, but that's a separate building permit that you'll get for that, correct?
It could be. I didn't include it. To be honest, I didn't include it because it's mostly transparent. It's mostly open. So, I did?
Uh, I've got another question, which is how big is? Okay.
Oh, okay.
No, the covered rear deck area is a separate area that there's a drawing that shows that of 58 square feet or some minor number. And I wish I had my magnifying glass.
Well, I'm looking at drawing A2 and it shows a pergola structure off to the rear of the home. So,
But I don't see it in the chart. I see a covered porch area.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I didn't include it. The covered porch I did include. There's a covered area where the big door is. Yeah.
So standing seam metal roofs. I know metal roofs have been around since the Romans, but when did standing seam metal roof start being manufactured? Do you know?
I couldn't tell you. No, had to been during the Industrial Revolution sometime, I'm sure.
Okay, and the last question is, and you may not know the answer, but sometimes when a chimney, if you don't have enough lateral distance separation from a chimney to another roof structure, you have to extend it up. Do you?
Well, the rule is you have to be 10 or 12 feet away. You have to be 2 feet above that. But that's only for wood burning. So it's not a wood burning fireplace, so that rule doesn't
You're doing a
apply
natural gas
anymore.
appliance?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I've got a couple more questions about the front landscaping. How big is the olive tree that you plan on putting in?
I would have to defer to the landscape designer or look at the plan because I didn't do that part. But you happen to know off the top of your head, Tricia, what that was? No. Is it noted on the plan? I can take a look. Yeah.
I have a hard time
have a
reading the vague and small type that we've got. So I couldn't figure it out. Well, olive trees don't grow very fast, so that would be my recommendation.
Okay. You okay with that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
For the record, could we specify a size?
Yeah, you want to do a box specimen, like a 36-inch box? That's a more substantial tree.
Sure.
Okay.
Any other questions? I also like the rendering. I think it's very nice. I particularly like the brick look of this house, and it is very similar to other houses in that block and blocks in general on Johnson Street. Yours is a very almost black color. That seems not in character, and I would urge you to consider a more a brick look that's
More terracotta.
that's more in keeping with the character of the neighborhood.
Okay.
Go back to the pergola. Is it attached to the main structure?
Yes. It doesn't have to be constructed though. It is attached to it. It comes off the gable of the kitchen.
Yeah, if I could just say one more, though, we can address the pergola at building permit stage regarding lot coverages and see if have the planning director make a determination if it's open or closed, covered porch. If it's open, if it's slats, so to speak, you can have the planning director make a determination on that and take care of that at building permit time.
Yeah, I'm assuming that nothing that we rule on tonight is going to tell you whether that's permitted as a part of the lot coverage issue.
I wouldn't think so. Any other questions of the applicant or staff? And if not, we'll open this up for public comment. Thank you very much. Anybody public would like to make comment on this, please come forward and state your name and make your comments. What was your name again?
Pamela Rudd.
Pamela Rudd.
The neighbor. Looking forward to having your family. It's a great looking house. Sorry. Just saying it's a great looking house. I'm looking forward to having her family next door to me. I do have, and I've had, as I've been going through this process and understanding the plans, coming to feel more comfortable with it and coming to understand the design a bit more. One of my main concerns at this point is the north side has a roof line that goes up to 18 feet, which means it's really quite in my backyard. And there's only a 5-foot setback, so it doesn't look like there's any landscaping along the north side, which would buffer and provide some privacy. Currently, there are a couple of trees in the front, which, I'm assuming they're right on the property line. I tried to repair the fence or tried to rebuild the fence because it's crashing, and couldn't finish it at the time because they have a barbecue that's like a bomb shelter there, and that would have had to come down in order to put the fence on the property line. So, yeah, the trees kind of to the left of the garbage can, although they don't look like much here, really do provide a buffer and a lot of shade in the summer. So for me, and also I think for you, putting a car there to have some kind of shade would be really important. But also wondered if there was a way to reduce the height of the, what do you call that thing? Gable on the north side. Other than that, I want to thank everybody. Jeff has been terrific in terms of helping translate, and this has been helpful too.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this agenda item? If not, come forward.
Hi, Eddie Meredith. I'm a neighbor at 702 Johnson Street. Just want to say that the project that Letitia and her family did before was very well done. We're excited to move on and get some of these properties that haven't been maintained, corrected. There's a lot of construction going on Johnson Street, and we think this is another project that's way overdue, and I know the neighbors to see a new beautiful home built there. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Anybody else? No, we'll close the public comment period and turn it over to commissioners to make comments and your position. Phil, would you like to start?
Sure. I second the comments about the staff report, and I hope it bodes well for the kinds of staff reports we'll get when the design guidelines come in. I think the biggest question I had was whether there were any other Gothic farmhouses in town, because it's not clear. There's a high-peaked sort of farmhousey house on the block to the south of the block in question. And I talked to Holly, and Holly clued me into a number of other Gothic American farmhouses in town. So I'm comfortable that even though it's not clear that there are any others on Johnson Street, it's the design is respectful enough of what's in town so that it's not it's as the only language we have in the code. It's in harmony, I think, with what else is there. I looked at Mrs. Rudd's written comments and her comments tonight, and from my perspective, the design here has done a good job of dealing with the neighbors. I think that there are a number of two-story houses on both sides of the street, and includes one two-story garage courtesy of Mr. Munson. So there are a number of the two stories are prevalent. I think the way this house is set on the lot with the setbacks associated with the upper story do a pretty good job. I think that I think the design overall comports with the street, and it goes without saying when you look at the house that's coming down that it'll be an improvement in that respect. I do have one other comment, which is I looked, even though I know you can't rely on it, I looked for language in the new design guidelines to see how the new design guidelines treated new houses in historic districts, and the answer is they don't. So that's something to think about because there's a lot of language about preserving existing houses and making additions that don't fiddle around with what's historic about them. But I think as a practical matter, this commission is going to deal more with either tear downers, of which there's lots of opportunities on Johnson Street, or vacant lots. So I think we ought to think about adding some language somewhere along the line on that.
And I'd be happy to email the commission. I actually looked at this today. It does actually have a section, 2 pages under new construction. I will email you the page number.
I didn't read the right section. All right.
Yeah, it's under Chapter 8 in Historic Resources.
Okay, good. All right, wonderful. Since they don't apply, my error is a harmless one. So I'm in support of the project.
I'm very much in support of this project. I think it's a beautiful addition to the neighborhood, and it suits the neighborhood well. The materials that we received to review this were wonderful. Really, they were wonderful, and really appreciate getting this kind of work. So, the only thing I had a concern about was the metal roof, and nobody else doesn't seem to bother anybody else, so, I'm not gonna worry about it, and, I'm very much in favor of it.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I would say that you almost can't go wrong on Johnson Street because there's every kind of house that anybody's ever dreamed of that the street has. It's a beautiful street, and it has, I think it's what makes Healdsburg what it is. And I would just go on to say that it was done basically without design review, but it looks good anyway. So there you go. I can't let those things go. So I think you've done a good job. Thank you.
Jeff?
Question to staff, policy standpoint, is the goal for design review of homes in a historical area to find homes that are compatible and to where you drive down the street or walk down the street and you can't tell the difference between the new and the old? Or is it more of a policy to blend in terms of big picture, but still be able to discern between the new and the old?
I think it's more the latter. Some of the Secretary of Interior standards, which are the higher level review that people do for getting federal tax credits, have to meet a particular standard. And especially when you're doing additions, the standard is you want to distinguish the new from the old, and you don't want to replicate like faux historic. So I think this building is executed well, and that, the brick finish gives it a more of a contemporary edge. So that that's probably not a traditional looking farmhouse. And I think the key thing that I'm emphasizing to staff as we do these reviews is the new infill in the district. We just want to make sure that it mirrors those things that Mr. Winter spoke of is respectful to the scale and the rhythm and the character and the massing, and let's give the homeowners flexibility to dictate the style. But clearly we're not trying to replicate and make things look all the same. We really do. I think there's a beneficial in saying this is new construction, but it celebrates and embraces the spirit of that district.
Part of my heartburn with the project, I think the massing, the site plan, the massing, the roof shape, all that is fine. Where I'm having a hard time is color, roof material, the color of the brick. And then the fact that we have a house across the street, which I knew was the same architect, because you just look and you can tell, and with the same light fixtures, the same board and bat, standing seam metal roof. And so the question would be, do we want to have two houses that are like sisters across the street from each other? Probably on Johnson Street, and probably Commissioner Edinger will clue me in real soon here. There's probably a couple of times where maybe two houses were built right next to each other, maybe the same general design, but they were mirrors in different brick and different color. And I've certainly seen that in the real world, but it does give me a little bit of heartburn where I look across the street and see a house that's real similar to this one. I'm concerned about the color of the brick veneer. My little voice tells me that I don't agree with the idea that the houses, you should be able to discern the difference. I think if you lived in a neighborhood and you're in a historic area, you want the other houses to blend in to where they're relatively indistinguishable. And we don't really have any written policy to support that either way. It's kind of just part of our general plan thinking. I think that, like I said, the massing of the structure is fine. I think if we have different colors, I'd be more inclined to support it, but I really am having a hard time getting over having a house that has tinges of contemporary and bright colors. I like to see it calmer.
Rich?
Well, first, like most of the commissioners, or all the commissioners, Jeff, you did an outstanding job in the staff report. It's really easy to read, very informative. A lot of my concerns are the same, and the design. architecturally, I like the design. The rendering really helps understand how the house fits together. The flat drawings were very difficult to look at and not feel that they're monotonous because of the batten board. The materials are, the shape of the house is excellent. It is modern, and you can't recreate a craftsman cottage anymore with the codes. So you try to get a design of a house that mirrors something of the traditional and still fits in. I'm concerned about the pergola. I would much rather see it detached from the house as a freestanding unit in the back. I think I could easily walk away and say, yeah, it's okay, just by being that in the backyard. Attaching it to the house, in what I've reviewed over the years, would be it's part of the house and would be part of the coverage. That's going to be a call of that director, our director. Detaching it, I have no problem with that. I have problems, though, with the brick and the starkness of the white. We've looked at several commercial buildings and other buildings where we had the stark contrast of colors, and it just didn't work out real well. I'd like to see a slightly off-white color, and I like the color of the brick that you've shown on the rendering. I know it's not what you're proposing, but it really does look nice. And the steel roof is okay, but the rendering also shows a kind of greenish tint. I happen to like the rendering better than I do the board that you presented. I'm willing to vote for it, but I would like consideration of those elements, particularly with the concerns of Commissioner Sivian. So I think you did an excellent job. And I think it may be the future of that block. We're going to see teardowns. There are a lot of houses in that area that look like they're candidates. So when we look at this, understand this is kind of your future. This is what we're going to see more of. But it's good architecture. So I just have some issues with the colors.
Thank you. I am also supportive of the project as a whole. I think it's consistent with our general plan, with our land use code. There's no variance asked for. The setbacks are all met, and all of the other requirements of our code are met. I think the design overall is a good design. I think the style of it, although there's not a lot of other contemporary farmhouses, I think it fits in the neighborhood. I think the setback in the front, the various methods that you've done to make the massing look different, smaller than it actually is, because my initial thought when I saw 3,500 square feet, I said, that's just too big. But the way you've done and designed it, I think, with the dormers being set away from the property lines on either side, I think was a really good idea. I think the front porches and the pitch of the roof make it look smaller than it actually is, which I think was a good decision. I think my only concerns was just kind of color, and I know you're not proposing different colors, and that's something that you need to consider, but I wish you would consider a little bit of the brick color and actually the tone of the white. There's a lot of beautiful whites out there and beautiful examples of white houses and farmhouses all through the city that sometimes are not quite as stark as this one. Other than that, I'm very supportive. So do I hear a motion on this project?
Chair Tracy, could I ask for a clarification on the color, the tone of the white? Does the commission support the color that's on that rendering, which you will see is much softer than what's actually on the materials board?
What I was going to do was make as part of a motion, a suggestion that we authorize the planning director to work with the applicant to get colors that are more in line with the renderings that were presented tonight, rather than the color board. This may give Mr. Sivian heartburn, but I think it's in the right direction.
If you would make
Yeah,
that a motion with that.
okay, I'll offer a resolution, PC resolution number 2018-3, a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Healdsburg approving the tower design review application DR 2017-11 with the following addition, that the planning director be authorized to work with the applicant to get the exterior paint, white paint color and the brick color more in line with the renderings that were presented to the Planning Commission this evening rather than the materials board.
Can I make an amendment to that?
Sure.
I'd like the pergola to be detached from the building. So there's no question that it's not part of the building.
Rich, I don't know what Robert's Rules of Order say, but I'm not inclined to accept it. I'm inclined to leave that issue with the planning director, and because I don't think we're approving that part of the design. Maybe, or if we are, I'm still inclined to leave the question of attachment to the planning director.
So far, we have a motion.
Yeah, and I'm not inclined to accept your amendment. Thanks.
Do we have a second? Did you have a comment?
I do. I think, and I'm fine with letting the planning director do something with the white, but I happen to be one that likes white. I think that probably 35 or 40% of that street is white. And, if it gets a little less white, maybe a mist white or something like that, it's fine with me. But I think that the colors that are shown there are good. The metal roof color looks fine to me, and the brick, I would agree, red is better, but I do like the white.
Yeah, I agree, but that's all I'm saying is get it closer to the renderings that we've seen tonight.
So we do have a motion and we have a second.
Question of staff.
Second?
Question?
I think, Jeff, you mentioned where the definition of covered area is open more than like 50%. I was doing a little bit of quick Googling, and it doesn't have to be habitable space, but the building official has strict definitions on how to do lot coverage, correct?
Well, it's not the building official, it's the zone. There's a definition in the land use code. Covered patios is specifically mentioned as being calculated in lot coverage.
Right.
Now, covered, we can let the planning director determine if a pergola type is covered or not. And just to clarify for Commissioner Bonnarini, if it's attached to the house, that still counts as lot coverage. But the difference is when it's attached, it has to meet primary dwelling setbacks. If it's detached, which also count, even accessory structures count as lot coverage. Okay, so but if it's detached from the house, then it would only have a 3-foot setback. It would not have to meet primary, the 5-foot setback basically for the primary dwelling.
Thank you. Can we call the roll?
Call the roll. Okay. Commissioner Bonnarini,
Yes.
Commissioner Sivian,
No.
Chair Tracy,
Yes.
Commissioner Ettinger,
Yes.
Commissioner Engler,
Yes.
and Commissioner Lux.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Where are we now? I guess we're any new business. No new business? Any commissioner or subcommittee reports?
I'd like to make a couple comments. Tonight when we were talking about the state mandated housing issues, it's in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe the last 5 or 6 years, we've been in Mendocino County and Sonoma County. There's if you build a winery, for instance, there's a fee for agricultural housing. You either pay the fee or you build the houses. The state, that's the only reason I read all this, otherwise I wouldn't have a clue. The state does have guidelines, and I would agree with everybody that had we known those guidelines, that would have been a a really slam bang thing. There's, for each person, there's a certain size bedroom, there's a shower, there's a lot of things that come in there. So if you build we just finished one in Roanoke Park for Gallo. It's it has 10 units to it. So there are 10 bedrooms, there are 10 bathrooms, half baths, and there are 2 large showers at each end and a kitchen. And there's a staff person there, which is part of what the state says, that does cooking and that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of guidelines, and
Thank you. That's good to know.
there's a lot of stuff out there that you have to comply with.
That was my assumption. We live in California. I'm shocked that there are guidelines in this area.
Do we have a report from the director?
The fees, are so high now that almost, I'd say more than half of the new wineries that are coming on board are building their own because the fee has gotten so high that it makes sense for them.
Just 2 brief updates. The design guidelines with the recommended land use code amendments and the amendments that we took from the discussion are going to the council on Tuesday for adoption. And then our next meeting, we will be bringing staff's proposed gun sales ordinance to the Planning Commission for consideration. So that's right now the only item scheduled. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank
Thank you.
So we are adjourned.